Chapter 7, Lala's Son. Judging by the damage the Federation pilots inflicted on us, Captain Makube said, sifting through reports from his men, we're dealing with a fairly powerful opponent. Yes, sir, Lieutenant Urigan replied. We have reason to believe there were over 10 enemy mobile suits, but it is possible that the count was slightly inflated if, for example, 2 of our pilots reported downing the same machine. Still, I agree. We shouldn't have lost 7 suits. An enemy mobile suit can't possibly be more powerful than a Zaku. Hold your tongue for a second, Lieutenant, Makube said. Urigan always talked too much, which irritated him. He wished he had brought along his little white marble Tang dynasty statue of the goddess of mercy. Its gentle expression could soothe the spirit of any who gazed upon it, and he often used it to help collect his thoughts. Right now, he was also disgusted by his own carelessness. Who would have dreamed he would run into a Federation fleet on what was supposed to be a routine patrol mission? How many mobile suits do you think the Federation Trojan horse can carry? He asked, referring to the Pegasus. Well, according to the information from Lieutenant Commander Charcer, he's a full commander now, Urigan, Makube said, interrupting. Yes, sir. General Staff Headquarters, based on information from the commander, has determined it can hold between 6 and 8 suits. Well, that's the number we're looking at then. Even if their mobile suits perform twice as well as ours, they still don't have any veteran pilots. It seems to me, then, that we're looking at no more than 8. Don't you agree, Urigan? Why, yes. Yes, sir. I don't know what Commander Char and the Zanzibar are up to at the Texas colony, but send an emissary requesting they go into action to support us. The Federation forces will make the next move. Sure enough, Makube was right. 20 minutes after Amuro received his commendation from Captain Watkins, Sayla broke the news to him over the video link that he had been ordered on a scouting mission. You all right, Amuro? She said softly. Bright tried his best to get Watkins to rescind his order, but we apparently lost track of the Zeon fleet that launched the Zakus earlier, and... Bright? Bright did that for me? As far as Amuro was concerned, Bright was usually preoccupied with yelling orders from the bridge, and it was hard to imagine him looking out for any of his pilots. As it turned out, however, at first, Hayato had been scheduled to launch in Amuro's stead, but Bright had refused, and his refusal had angered Watkins. Why can't Hayato go? Amuro asked. What's wrong with sending him out? Sayla answered lightly. I think the skipper trusts you, Amuro. And then, weaken asteroids from See the Bridge. Be careful. Since their conversation in the mess hall, Sayla had begun to let down her guard with Amuro. He, for that matter, had been unable to forget the strangely beautiful blue color of her eyes. There was something in her eyes that hinted of a great personal burden. There was something different about the woman he had always thought of as the blonde, and he knew it was more than his imagination. Later, while doing a pre-flight check on the Gundam, he wondered to himself if she might even be a new type. After checking the signal shells, the beam rifle, the bazooka, and its spare rockets, he called out, "Gundam, ready for takeoff." Sayla wished him luck over the video link, and then he felt the G-force of the launch. It felt better than he remembered. "Hey, Hayato!" Kai called out to his friend, watching the Gundam launch on the monitor in the Pegasus's briefing room. Be thankful it's Amuro. It lessens the odds we'll buy the farm. But I'm a full ensign just like him, Hayato exclaimed. How come I'm still just an alternate Gundam pilot? Tough luck. We're not new types. We're gun cannon specialists now, Hayato. What are you getting at? Well, don't you think Amuro's a little different than we are? Nope. I still don't have the foggiest idea what people mean by new types. Well, since we're just average Joes, they're basically telling us to take a back seat. Nothing wrong with that, as far as I can see. Heck, I don't want to meet the same fate Ryu did. Hayato, his eyes glued to the video monitor, said nothing. On the launch deck, the Mecha men were scurrying about, doing last-minute maintenance on the gun cannon. This time there was nothing for the pilots to do but wait. Noticing after a while that Kai had fallen silent, he turned and looked at his friend and found him sound asleep in his reclining chair. Pilots were specially chosen officers, and Hayato had no reason to think he was incompetent, but when he thought of his peer, Amuro, carrying out difficult and dangerous assignments, he could not help feeling a trace of self-disgust. If, as General Revel had suggested, new types symbolized a transformation of all mankind, then they clearly were not mere comic book-style supermen. And if, as implied, a human consciousness-raising was going to herald a new stage in man's evolution, well, that would be almost too good to be true. In the past, man's progress had always seemed dependent on his periodically destroying the very civilization he had built. If that could be changed, who would need something as terrible as war? But it seemed to Hayato that there was something about all this that smacked of nonsense. If the Zeon government was really planning to form a special new type corps, its members could hardly represent a total transformation of humanity. Surely they would simply be a group of murderous supermen, even super butchers. Weren't new types just some kind of freak mutants? Hayato had never heard of any people with special powers, at least not with powers of the type currently being whispered about, who had made so much as a dent in history. New types, Hayato concluded, were really just deviant personalities. There was no other way he could comfortably compare himself to Amuro. His pride would not allow it. Wending his way around asteroids up to 2 kilometers in diameter, Amuro traced his way in the Gundam over the Federation squadron's planned course. Captain Watkins was not so foolish as to leave the advanced scouting to the Gundam alone. The 4 surviving public attack ships were deployed in a supporting role, above, below, and to either side of him. As the formation navigated past another asteroid, Amuro encountered a giant piece of wall panel over a kilometer long, a remnant of one of the Side 5 colonies destroyed in the Battle of Rome. Sensing something odd, he tilted the Gundam forward and started to maneuver around the wall. Far off in the distance to the left he could see Texas. The moon, as usual, appeared so enormous that it nearly overwhelmed his optic nerves. If the enemy was lying in wait on the other side of the wall, he realized they would be in the perfect position to ambush the Federation fleet when it came by. Just as he was puzzling over what he sensed, a corner of the wall seemed to ignite, and a group of particle beams stabbed through the space toward his suit. He responded reflexively, and the incredible speed of his movements was transmitted to the Gundam, which creaked and groaned as if tortured. The core of the enemy beams missed, but a few diffused particles on their periphery pierced the Gundam's armor. The bazooka fastened to the machine's back was blown to smithereens. What the heck happened? Just when his guard was down, he had been hit by a particle beam attack. He had evaded it, and that was that. He knew an enemy mobile suit could easily have been waiting to ambush him from behind the wall, but the beams aimed at him were far too powerful. Putting his mobile suit through a wide, evasive maneuver, he slipped around to the other side of the wall and found himself staring at a small squadron of Zeon ships, looking up at their bottoms, from his perspective. Scattered smaller fire, both particle beams and missiles, streaked toward him, missing but nonetheless unnerving him. No wonder he had sensed something odd. 1 heavy cruiser and 2 Musai-class ships had been lying in wait for him, and the first blast that had zapped out at him through the darkness had come from their main cannons. The thought made his flesh crawl. It was a miracle that he had not been pulverized. Without hesitating, Amuro moved into action. The Musai-class ship immediately in front of him blocked his view of the heavy cruiser chibe, making a direct hit on it with his beam rifle impossible. He therefore trained his rifle sights at the Musai-class ship and pulled the trigger. 3 beam blasts pierced the engine on one side of the vessel, but just before the entire craft blew, the Chibe and the other Musai-class ship accelerated forward, and 2 Zakus that had been hiding behind them came toward him, firing rockets from their bazookas. One smashed into the Gundam's right arm. Damn! The Zakus had seized the perfect moment to attack. Amuro was still drunk with his own success at bagging the Musai cruiser. He cursed his foolishness. Luckily, although his suit's right arm had received a direct hit, the joint had been spared and the arm still functioned. But the power lines connecting the main engine to the beam rifle mechanism had been damaged, leaving it unusable, and there was no time to switch the rifle to the Gundam's left hand, which was holding the shield. Amuro therefore tried to ward off attacking blasts with the shield while he bolted the rifle onto a restraining fixture on the Gundam's hip. Then he unsheathed a beam saber hilt from his backpack. Positioning himself between the two oncoming Zakus, he thanked the stars that Gundam's beam, saber, and rifle had independent power lines. If not, he would have been a goner. With a zap, the saber hilt projected a blade of beam particles over 10 meters in length, which sliced into the left shoulder of one of the oncoming Zakus. Amuro knew he had connected with the enemy mobile suit, but he did not have time to check if he had delivered a mortal blow. They were both streaking toward the giant cylinder of the Texas colony, and unless he was careful, he himself would crash into its walls. Turning and accelerating the Gundam way into the Tatch Red Line, he swooped right in front of the Zakus. Carefully avoiding the colony's giant extended mirrors, he glanced at his rearview monitor and for the first time saw concrete proof of his kill in the form of a fading burst of light from an explosion. But what about the other Zaku? He would have to be extra careful. It had had the insignia of a squad leader on it. He badly needed to check the damage to the Gundam's right arm. As he soared alongside the colony, he spotted its docking bay and decided to enter and take cover. It was on the sunny side of the huge cylinder, but at least he would be temporarily out of sight of the Zakus. The Gundam mobile suit, as Amuro found once he parked in the bay and took a close look, could withstand a lot. The armor in its damaged right arm was constructed of a triple-layered, compound honeycomb material and had a 4 or 5 centimeter dent in it and what looked like a hole. The arm would still work, but using it to hold the beam rifle was out of the question. What he really needed at this point was a bazooka. Beam rifles were formidable weapons, but they taxed the concentration of already overburdened pilots because they required great marksmanship, unlike bazookas and other old-style weapons, which created a more diffuse explosion and required a less precise aim. With a beam rifle, anything less than a direct hit was meaningless. And as Amuro's earlier skirmish had proved, mobile suit pilots had to operate on a hair-trigger basis, with no room for mistakes. During the 2 or 3 seconds of exultation over hitting a Musai, his overconfidence had almost led to disaster. He had let down his guard and almost let a Zaku blindside him. Now parked inside the Texas colony docking bay, he had no idea where the enemy, especially the surviving Zaku, was, nor did he know who its pilot was. He knew he was not dealing with the Red Comet, but judging by the earlier action, he felt certain its pilot was a veteran of more than one battle. On the Zeon cruiser Chibe, Captain Makube was livid. "What?" he said. "No response from Commander Char?" A Federation squadron of 4 ships had already arrived on the scene, and his ship, as well as the cruiser Quammel, had come under fire. True, like him, the Federation forces did not have much firepower, but the mobile cruiser Zanzibar Char was on, now supposedly docked on Texas, was far more powerful and agile than any Musai-class ship and should have been able to arrive on the scene in a few minutes. If it would only come to his aid, he thought, he could hit the Federation ships broadside and destroy them all. Now here he was, in the midst of a battle, with particle beams from cannons on both sides crisscrossing through space, unable to deliver fatal blows but pulverizing several small asteroids in the process. Luckily for Makube, his men were brave. 2 of his Zakus even courageously managed to approach the Federation fleet flagship HAL. If only that white enemy mobile suit had not appeared on the scene so fast and spoiled his surprise earlier. Makube was convinced his carefully planned ambush would have wiped out the Federation's entire 13th Autonomous Corps. Perhaps he had given away his position by being too hasty to attack the Gundam, but he was not the type to dwell on the pros and cons of past decisions. His was a simple philosophy. If a crisis arose, it had to be solved. He was also pragmatic enough to put his personal grudges aside for the moment, and really did wish Char were around to help him now. After all, he had lost the Tolmeth, a Musai-class cruiser, and 8 Zakas. He had an account to settle. Makube's Chibe concentrated a barrage of fire on the Federation Magellan-class flagship HAL. Dodging blasts of friendly fire, the 2 Zeon Zakus also contributed their own firepower. Under normal circumstances, that would have been an absurd strategy, but Makube knew he had no other choice if he wished to get the upper hand. Lieutenants Rolm and Zirol are piloting our Zakus, are they not? Yes, sir. Lieutenant Urigan wondered why his captain would ask such a question at a time like this. Well, I certainly feel proud of those men today, Makube exclaimed in his subordinate's face just as a shout went up from the other officers and men on the bridge. The main engine on the HAL had turned into a ball of light. That's the way, Makube exulted, standing at attention on the bridge and urging on his forces while the mushrooming orb of light threatened to envelop them. Now go for the Trojan horse. Turn your guns on the Trojan horse. But Zeon guns were not the only ones capable of hitting their targets. Several blasts from Federation beam cannon also scored direct hits on the Chibe. Then 8 missiles struck home. Then 2 more. The main foredeck cannons were knocked out of action, and to use the aft cannon to maximum effect, Makube had no choice but to swing his ship around, exposing his right flank to the enemy. Lieutenant Urigan yelled out a report. Lieutenant Rolm Zaku has reached the cruiser on our port side, sir. Over on the Pegasus, Brait was livid. What? Hayato's taken off on his own? The kid's crazy to go out there in the midst of a battle between fleets. Order him back at once. It was madness for Hayato to have taken off in the middle of the crossfire between enemy warships, but once he was outside the immediate area, the incredible latticework of light he saw looked like beautiful shining threads. It was hard to imagine being hit by them. It made him realize why, in the vastness of space, it really was difficult to achieve a direct hit on anything. Homing in on the beams of light coming from the enemy, Hayato could see that the Zeon cruiser Chibe was half destroyed, but still pursuing the attack. He marveled how calm he felt as he trained his sights on its aft-deck cannon. Indulging in a little self-satisfaction, he concluded that he had finally become a seasoned combat veteran. He pulled the trigger, and the 2 cannon built into the shoulders of his suit belched forth flames. 3, 2, 1. He did a countdown by himself while putting the gun cannon into a broad curve to the left and training his sights on the other Musai-class cruiser on the other side of the Chibe. And just then, the aft-deck cannon on the Chibe exploded. "Bullseye!" Hayato yelled. Makube's ship gave its final gasp, and then a ball of light equal to that made by the HAL earlier highlighted both the asteroids and the surviving warships in the area. In the midst of all this, the Kwamel, the last Musai-class cruiser in the Zeon squad, heeled about sharply, desperately trying to escape. "Can't let them get away," Hayato swore to himself in the narrow confines of his gun cannon cockpit as he swooped after the Kwamel. The Pegasus fired a signal flare indicating that all forces should regroup, but Hayato was too preoccupied to notice. Over by the Texas colony, the Zeon Zaku squad leader following Amuro closed in for the kill outside the docking bay. Since the colony port was nearly 400 meters in diameter, he fired 2 rockets from his bazooka as cover before entering and then, without waiting for the explosion to clear, plunged inside. Amuro quickly retreated behind an old transport ship scuttled in the center of the colony's port. He could physically sense the intruder's presence. He was learning to sense things from inside a cockpit, and he was seized by a crazy idea. He would try to grab the bazooka from the Zaku, and then he saw the girl. It was such an odd sight that for a moment he wondered if he was seeing things. She was standing in a corner of what used to be the colony's control core, behind the multi-layered glass of its observation window, and from his perspective, she was upside down. Despite the distance, her emerald green eyes were strikingly beautiful, almost transparent and glowing, and he sensed something indescribably powerful, even vast in them. Remembering what he had sensed in Sela once before, he felt a vague sense of déjà vu. What could it be? He wondered. Even more important, was the girl real? The control core of the abandoned colony was unmanned, and the lights should have been extinguished long ago. The girl was standing in darkness, yet around her there was a faint glow. The notion of a ghost crossed Amuro's mind, but was soon cancelled by a powerful realization that this girl did in fact exist, that she was there. He did not know exactly where his realization came from, and wondered if it was a projection of her own conscious thought, an awareness that she was deliberately creating in him. Without verbalizing, something in Amuro's mind nearly screamed, "Less than who are you? Greater than," and again, "Less than who are you? Greater than." The question was pleading, almost desperate, almost a physical yell. "What do you want from me?" Could she hear him? She appeared to smile, and when a transparent light seemed to pierce the center of her forehead, he hoped it was all an illusion. But then he understood it was real. She had parted her jet-black hair in the middle of her head and gathered it in buns on either side. Her skin was a glistening tan, and the contrast made her emerald green eyes seem almost transparent. Her dress also surprised him. It was nothing more than folds of cloth hung over her neck and draped around her body, an awfully mature outfit for someone so young. But then another realization welled up inside him. She was the same age as he was. It was a physical sensation and undeniable. It was incredible. Then he felt a growing awareness of a new sensation, a darker force, like a shadow, run through his cerebral lobes. He sensed Z.A.K. The enemy had brazenly managed to sneak up behind him and was now so close that he could have finished the Gundam off with a bazooka blast. But he did not. Instead, the Zaku swung its glowing heat axe toward the Gundam's hips in an attempt to connect with and destroy the Gundam's powertrain. But Amuro forced his suit to move so fast that the metal screamed and dodged the blow in the nick of time. Like a knife slicing through butter, instead of Gundam armor, the Zaku's heat axe sliced through the wall of the abandoned transport. Seizing the moment, Amuro raised the beam rifle in the Gundam's functioning left hand and slammed its stock into the Zaku's left shoulder, sending it smashing into the side of the transport. The ship's framework shook, and as the Zaku rebounded from it, Amuro jammed his rifle muzzle into its cockpit area. He knew there was a human pilot inside, and when he pulled the rifle trigger, it felt colder than normal. The beam from his gun pierced the Zaku, sliced through the wrecked transport, and even reached the control core on the other side of the port. Heaving a sigh of relief at his narrow escape, Amuro shoved the fallen Zaku out toward the colony port exit. It scraped and bounced on the deck once, spun crazily, and then drifted out and off toward the sun. Somehow, Amuro did not want the girl to see what he had done. The fight with the Zaku had taken only a few seconds in all, and he had not even glanced at the monitor that earlier had shown the girl, but he was afraid she might have become frightened and disappeared. For him, that would have been a disaster. He had no idea who she was, but she had seemed easily capable of understanding his intentions. To lose contact with her would be terrifying. She had made him realize something profound, that he was not alone, that she was a kindred spirit he must meet. It was an intuitive realization, the recognition of one new type by another, yet even Amuro himself was not fully aware of what was happening. While pushing the Zaku corpse out the docking bay, fearing she was no longer there, he suddenly sensed her presence. He mentally saw her. He knew she was still there. He knew her name was Lala-san, and he knew she was real. Unable to stand the idea of looking at her over a video monitor, Amuro yanked a lever for the Gundam's main hatch. The orthoscopic monitor lowered, and the double-layered hatch door opened up and outward. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and looked straight at her. If he had not still been in the vacuum of space in the colony's docking bay, he would even have removed his normal suit helmet. And if he could have, he would have smashed the glass panels of the control core window that still separated them. There was too much between them. He could sense her physical presence, but visually she was still too unclear, too unstable. With her still standing upside down from his perspective, he stared straight into her eyes and asked, "Lala, what are you doing here?" He knew there was no voice channel available, but she responded anyway, as if she had physically heard. Her hands floated up to her cheeks, and her nearly transparent emerald green eyes seemed to cloud over in sadness. He knew her spirit was wavering. He knew she was afraid but could not tell why. He cursed the limitations of trying to understand her mind. But then he clearly sensed a thought from her directed at him, assaulting his brain like a wave. It was a perception so powerful that it threw his mind off balance for a second and allowed her to connect directly with his consciousness. Less than you're too late, greater than. Less than what do you mean, greater than? Amuro felt like a hole was being bored in his brain, splitting his nervous system in two. What did she mean? Who was the Char she spoke of? It was too late. Love. All he could think of was who are you, less than why, greater than. Suddenly, as the girl gradually began to express herself, several thoughts struck the confused Amuro simultaneously, and behind them he could still sense sadness and anxiety. Less than, why are you so late? It took you too long to get here, greater than. The thoughts were clear and filled Amuro's awareness. Less than I had no idea you existed, greater than. What are you talking about? What has all this got to do with me? Amuro tried to answer but then stopped. She had mentioned Char. Could she possibly mean the same Char he knew as the Red Comet? Char Aznable. This time, Amuro's words were not received by Lala's son. Their form of communication was unlike telepathy, which never needed spoken words. Nor was it triggering some sort of leap in consciousness. As impressions were traded back and forth, an awareness that transcended conscious thought was built up. What seemed like an exchange of fragmentary ideas created the context for understanding another person. It was not a simple means of communication. It was more like a weaving together of two minds. And it allowed Amuro to feel the sadness behind Lala-san's words. Less than you are too late. I just realized now that you are the one I was waiting for, but you're too late. Greater than. Less than my name's Amuro Ray. I'm from the Federation. I don't understand why you'd be waiting for me here in Texas of all places. Do you mean you were waiting for some sort of kindred spirit? Greater than. Less than, he said, it was a new person. It was you, not the commander. This is too cruel. Greater than. Amuro's next thought was like a dagger to Lala's heart. Less than I don't think a true new type would make a mistake like that. Greater than. Less than how can you say such a cruel thing? Why didn't you contact me? Greater than. With that, Amuro had a profound realization of his own basic weakness, and he lamented it deeply. Less than because I don't think I'm really a new type. Greater than, less than we. We are both imperfect, Amuro. Greater than, less than maybe. But listen, Lala's son. What can we do about it? We're supposed to be enemies. Greater than. Less than I don't know. I just know I'm supposed to be the pilot of this mobile armor. I'm the first pilot in our new type combat unit. but I can't believe this is my only mission in life. Meeting you has convinced me. But that said, I'm greater than. Less than I get it, greater than. Amuro had a powerful, sudden insight. New types might be real after all, and it just might be possible, as he and Salamas had once discussed, that people could learn to communicate on a new level. It was an incredible idea, but perhaps hundreds, thousands, even millions of different levels of awareness could overlap, and perhaps mankind could one day finally leave its prejudices behind and achieve a universal wisdom. Amuro had to believe in the idea. He had no other way of comprehending the thoughts flowing back and forth between him and Lala's son, but he answered based on an objective reality. Less than I hope you're right. Greater than. Lala sensed his meaning, and the implications of what failure would mean, and fell deeper into despair. Amuro, for his part, realized that he just might have a spark of new type insight within him, pointing the way toward his own destiny. Less than Amuro, it's too cruel. Amuro, you've got to stop me. Greater than. Less than what? Greater than. He did not understand. He saw her emerald green eyes, her tawny skin that seemed to melt into the surrounding darkness, her long, supple limbs, and her beautiful head of hair. She appeared to waver and then tried to smash through the glass barrier that separated them. He was taken aback by her abrupt change in behavior and was completely at a loss how to respond. Then a door opened behind Lala, and through the light it let in, Amuro made out the shadow of a quickly moving man. A sound like static violently intruded on his and Lala's thought communication. There was a perceptual spark and then a fragmentary interruption by a third thought form overlaid on his and Lala's. It was not words, it was a ruptured type of noise, and it assumed an aura of hate. The man was wearing a red military uniform with a platinum-colored helmet and face mask, and he appeared to be an officer of the Zeon forces. A cape fluttered from his back. It was Commander Shar Aznable, also known as Kasval Remdakun, of the Zeon forces. So this is the Red Comet, Amuro thought to himself. When Shar spoke, the words were real. Lala, he curtly ordered, get out of here, now. Be but commander, she started to say as if afraid. The interruption resulted in confusion in all three's awareness, but the confusion was soon transformed to an instinct common to all mammals, a fighting instinct. Through the glass window of the control core window, Char saw the object of Lala's attention, a young Federation pilot dangling out of the cockpit hatch of a Gundam mobile suit. Lala, glancing at Char, was unable to hide her panic. She saw in him a lovable quality to which she was powerfully attracted, but she also saw emerging in him one of man's most despicable traits. She knew that the combination, in this situation, would be disaster for her. Amuro, for his part, mournfully watched the couple in the control core, too young and inexperienced to understand all the ways of men and women. He watched Lala tremble and thought, so that's what she meant about being too late. As Amuro watched, the red-uniformed Zeon officer floated across the room and out the door with Lala in his arms. The door slammed shut, and the control core command center was again deserted. Amuro craved more contact with the mysterious Lala's son, but he had just seen what he thought was incontrovertible evidence of her physical love for his archenemy. A thought suddenly ran through his brain in a way he did not fully understand. It was more than a sixth sense, it was subtle proof that he was developing an expanded awareness and power of insight. It said, less than time to scram, greater than he was in real danger. Quickly shutting the Gundam hatch, he checked his beam rifle. It was low on energy, so he maneuvered the mobile suit to pick up the bazooka left behind by the Zaku he had earlier dispatched. It still had 3 rockets left in it. Then he moved over toward the colony port exit, where the Gundam instruments detected the Pegasus and its 2 accompanying cruisers nearby in space. Even the gun cannons were close enough to be identified. Amuro should have felt overjoyed, but he could not suppress a basic animal instinct welling up inside him. Lala's son, he whispered. He wanted to see her close up. He wanted to touch her. He wanted her. His perception of danger was already beginning to fade, and he had no way of knowing what kind of enemy was really lying in wait inside Texas. When encountering a member of the opposite sex with whom one had a powerful intuitive understanding, physical desire could sometimes be masked. But when the actual thought waves of both individuals were almost perfectly intertwined, the encounter could also be a powerful aphrodisiac. Amuro was far too young to understand what was happening to him or to restrain himself. Instead of launching into space toward the Pegasus, he spun the Gundam around and walked toward the series of hatches at the other end of the colony port. Opening them one by one, he stepped through the last door that led inside Texas. It was virtually impossible to see the inner surface of the colony from the final hatch. Giant external mirrors normally reflected sunlight inside the colony, but their automatic control mechanism was broken, and for the last few months they had been stuck on something equivalent to dawn or dusk. Atmospheric conditions inside the colony had deteriorated into violent windstorms, with sand-colored tornadoes often occurring around the colony's central axis. Keeping his eyes on the Gundam's main monitor, Amuro watched a small whirlwind form next to him and twist through the air, wondering where Lala might be in the 360-degree panorama in front of him. He tried to rely on his intuition. He closed his eyes and focused his mind, to no avail. It was frustrating. Only a few minutes earlier he had been so close to her that he could almost have physically called out to her. He asked himself what to do. The next instant he barely dodged an incoming bazooka rocket, but a fraction of a second before it burst next to him with a leaden whump. He put the Gundam into a jump maneuver toward the direction of its origin, somewhere above to his right. He soared to an elevation of nearly 500 meters off the colony floor, right through the middle of a brown twister cloud. There were fierce winds blowing throughout the colony, but luckily a true greenhouse effect had not occurred. Without the cooling effect of the external walls, the place would have been an inferno. As Amuro made a rapid descent into a corner of the Texas colony, for the first time he saw the grand scale of the place. Although he had spent the first few years of his life on Earth, his father, a construction engineer, had taken him into outer space almost as early as he could remember, and he had returned to Earth only 3 times after that, always to visit his mother. He was familiar only with the gentle mountains and temperate climate of her home, and had never experienced anything like the wild environment of Texas. The people who had designed Texas had done their best to represent nature in all its glory, and had paid special attention to visual effects. Rivers and streams wound through steep canyons that appeared to have been carved by centuries of erosion. Forests of evergreens spread on the foothills. The environment was totally artificial, but the scenery was more than enough to evoke images of the ancient reality on which it had been modeled. Although the plains were now desert, once tourists had delighted in the sight of hundreds of cattle herded by cowboys, imagined campfire smoke in the distance to be signals from Indians. Crossed the colony's glass sections on giant bridges made to look like natural rock formations, and experienced a simulation of the wild and woolly days of the Wild West on Earth's North American continent. The Gundam mobile suit dropped out of a dust cloud on the verge of forming a vortex and sailed into a roaring wind. With his attention diverted by the scenery unfolding before him, Amuro nearly made a fatal mistake. But as before in the colony port area, a cool light-like sensation seemed to bore into his forehead. As his awareness expanded to 360 degrees, he sensed a specific direction, and just in the nick of time he dodged another incoming enemy round. "Where are you?" Amuro muttered, scanning the area around him. He knew it might be overconfidence, but he somehow felt he was better positioned to deal with the enemy, even if it was Sharaznable, the Red Comet, than the enemy was to deal with him. "Where are you?" he growled again, frustrated by the fact that his new awareness could not help him pinpoint a distant target. Perhaps, he thought, it was because of the turbid atmospheric conditions. But unknown to Amuro, Sharaznable was already retreating with Lala's son to the port on the opposite end of the colony cylinder, where the Zanzibar was anchored. Earlier, inside the colony, Dr. Flanagan and his team of assistants had performed the first successful feasibility tests of the Elmeth Bits mobile armor system with Lala. The bits, equipped with beam cannon and explosive charges, were operated remotely and were made to attack when her willpower was channeled and amplified through the Psychomu interface. From the cockpit of the Elmeth, without using its beam cannon, she had simultaneously mobilized and fired the cannon on 8 out of 10 bits and had effectively destroyed the test targets. It was after completing this test that she had wandered on her own to the control core of the colony's other port and encountered Amuro. When Shar had taken her away from the control core, he had put her under the care of the Flanagan team in the mobile trailer used to launch the Elmeth bit system and immediately moved to attack the infiltrator mobile suit, Amuro, and the Gundam. Shar's mood had plunged to near despair. The pilot's a new type. He may not be as advanced as Lala, but there's no other way to explain the way he parries my attacks. His worst fear on first encountering the white enemy mobile suit, that there were new types among the Federation pilots, had been borne out. He knew mankind might be in the midst of a transition, even a new type of evolution, but it was wartime. If there were to be a genesis of new types, the real question was, when would the fetus begin quickening, and what kind of labor pains would result? He himself might have new type potential. He was at least capable of one form of insight that the older, conservative, earthbound generations were not. He was able to recognize a true new type when he saw one. And this time, he had to believe his opponent was one. After all, a terrified young Federation recruit had nicknamed him the Red Comet. If he was not up against a new type, his pride would crumble from the shame of his failure to defeat his opponent. Damn, he thought. Making his way in his mobile suit through the colony's evergreen belt, he checked all his monitors for any sign of the enemy. After parrying Shar's second barrage, the white mobile suit had looked as if it would make a steep descent and come in for a hard landing on the colony floor. But the pilot might have anticipated his movement. Shar began to doubt himself. Had he ordered too high a concentration of Minovsky particles scattered in the area for Lala's test earlier? The scan lines on his mobile suit radar display had turned to static,